Christ the King Sunday. And so we're encouraged to join that crowd from the gospel passage to wonder on this day who this Jesus is, who this Christ is for us in the world. And it's important theologically because there are a lot of voices out there who are trying to tell us who they know Jesus to be and who they think we should believe Jesus is. And some of those voices have falsely wedded Christ to political and worldly power and say this is important for us to buy into. And probably since Constantine made Christianity the religion of empire, the church has struggled because often it is forgotten one of its prime directives. It's gotten distracted by all that. See, spirituality is supposed to make us good human beings. And religion at its best is the vessel and the community to help us and support us in our spirituality. Support us becoming healthy, good, loving, compassionate human beings. And I'm actually convinced that God cares far less about what we believe than how we behave. Let me just say that again, because it's a mouthful. I am convinced that God cares far less about what we believe than about how we behave. Love is a verb. Love is a verb. It's about behaving in a particular way. And how we behave is deeply influenced with how we understand this Jesus and our connection to God, connection to source, connection to the holy. It's interesting because the gospel reading today begins with that story of people wondering who this Jesus is. They've heard things about him. They've seemingly even seen things that he's done. And yet they ask who he is. So what about us? What do we say? Who do we say? Who is this? Who do we say that he was, or do we say is? It's interesting. Are we with the crowd? Do we find ourselves in that crowd who's a little confused? I mean, we know the stories. We know who this man is, where he comes from. Basically, we know his family. So he couldn't be too special, could he? But then again, he did do some amazing things. Are we impressed by the signs? Are we impressed by the things he did? Now, okay, that's the signs and works part, but he himself doesn't seem particularly too impressed by them or wanting to focus on them. And in fact, by the end of today's passage, he seems to shift the narrative to something completely different. Those who believe, out of their hearts shall flow living water. Think of that for a moment. We've talked about some of that imagery already in service. Think about what he's saying. How many of us know that living water? How many of us have found that living water within us? How many of us actively seek that living water? It's interesting. All the angst of the first two parts of the passage and the authorities and the temple folks, all of these show this incredible, confrontational, difficult, turbulent time that he was in the midst of. That resonate with anybody about today? And yet, with all of this right in his face, he reminded his followers that when they are connected to Spirit, they will be nourished. They will find nurture. They will find strength. They will find streams of living water flowing within them, out of their hearts. I hope for us there's at least a little comfort in that for us and for our times, to be reminded that that is indeed available for us as well. Now, I'm intrigued. I'm going to be a little radical right now, if you don't mind, and say that the title of Christian doesn't mean much to me anymore. The title. I've seen people who call themselves Christian, who embrace that title, who behave in absolutely horrible ways. How many of us have seen that? How many of us have been those folks? I'll say, I've not done well all the time. And I think that those ways, those things, make the Christ weep or facepalm. One of the pieces of the election that I think is incredibly clear is that the church at large needs to do some reflection about what it promotes as Christian behavior, what it upholds as what being a Christian means, what are its values, who champions Christianity these days. There's a saying that I hold on to. When a person shows you who they are, believe them. Not tells you who they are, because people spin stuff incredibly well. But when they show you who they are, believe them. Our behavior matters, and it speaks volumes. And out of that, our behavior comes from somewhere. That's what I wanted to say. Jesus said that out of a believer's heart shall flow streams of living water. How seriously do we take that? That living water that seems to be flowing out of our hearts and into the world. Now, yes, I get it. It's a metaphor. Don't look for living water in there. People have water on their hearts. It's not a good thing. But it's an image that we can shoot for. It's a reality in the spiritual level that makes all the sense in the world. What is coming out of the heart of Christianity these days? It's a hard thing for me to see. What's coming out of believers' hearts around the world? And I'm trying to stay away from judgment and condemnation. And let's be clear. Let's look clear-eyed into this, because it's something for all of us to reflect on. Before we point at some people out there, the goal is to look at ourselves. What's flowing out of our hearts? What's coming out of my heart today? As I preach, as I engage, as I welcome people. That's important. If I'm just venting my anger on you, that's coming out of my heart, my woundedness, my frustration. Y'all wouldn't be coming to church very long, I would hope, for your sakes. But what's coming out of our hearts? It's important. Part of that outflow from our hearts clearly informs our behavior and how we treat other people. That outflow really comes from our connection to the one we call God. And I'm convinced that all of us would do incredibly well to double down on our prayer time for the next 4 years. Well, and beyond. Double down on our meditation time. I remember a pastor who came to Taizé, and he said, Erik, I read an article that was kind of disturbing. Is that most people, the average person, prays or meditates for 2 minutes a day. That's it. He said, but there's good news, because spiritual leaders over double that average, and they pray or meditate for over 5 minutes a day. Think about that for a second. That was way back then, so I'm sure it's different now. However, when we say we are people who follow the Christ, what does that mean to us? Is that just a title, a mantle that we wear? Or are we really seeking to connect to the living one? Are we really seeking to dwell in that place of sacredness? To connect to the call of the Christ to love our neighbor as ourselves, to be living water for this world? When times and voices around us are turbulent and we feel unsteady, we need to double down on what steadies us. Don't we? That would make logical, rational sense. And yet, sometimes we don't. Can you imagine a man coming out of the desert, thirsty beyond thirst, his skin scorched, his mouth completely dry, there's sand all over him, he's just dragging himself out of the desert, and you see him and you rush over and say, here's some water. And he goes, No thanks, I'm good. How often are we like the man? And how often do we go to the well of living water to drink, to be refreshed? Prayer, meditation, different ways of praying, our spiritual practices, walking in nature, exercising, those aren't supposed to be have-tos. They're not supposed to be obligations. They're supposed to be those places that we go to be filled, to find the cornucopia within us again, to be refreshed, to be connected once more. If we can't drink ourselves, it seems virtually impossible to have those living waters flowing so abundantly from our hearts. If we are those who are spiritually parched, the spigots have a hard time opening on their own. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? God is not an object to be admired. God is not an entity to just be thought about or reflected upon. The Creator is to be one who is engaged with, to find communion with, to allow ourselves to get so lost in God that we are found once more, and to find our deepest, truest, best selves in the process. The image of living water has been around for thousands of years. God as water, as source. And I would argue that only a tiny slice of the world knows what that means and actually actively drinks from that source, opens themselves to find that connection so that living water can flow out of their hearts and into the world. One of the important pieces, central pieces of the spiritual life is, where is your source? And do you not just know the source, but do you actively drink from it? We can talk a really good game. We can say we're followers of the Christ. But do we embody that love? Do we embody that abundance? One of the greatest gifts of chaotic times is that they teach us what our priorities are. And they remind us where to go to find our nurture. They can allow us to feel the parchedness that's always there, and then find how to drink. My last little tidbit from the passage today is this. You might notice that Jesus said that streams of living water would be within people. Let anyone who is thirsty come to me. Let the one who believes in me drink. And out of their hearts will flow living water. Do you hear the difference from what we usually are taught? Now, yes, we need to drink. Yes, we need to find our connection. This is part 2. One of the reasons that we drink is so that the spigots can open, so that that water can flow out of us. We seek the connection not because God's the one who's of abundance and just kind of pours it out into the world, but we open our connection to God so that it flows out of us, so that there's an abundance within us. It's not just that God is supposed to be the abundant one. Guess what? That's supposed to be in us, so that the abundance flows into the world from us. The streams of water flow through us into the world, from our hearts into the world. It's a remarkable teaching, not something we focus very often. We are here, hopefully, as a church, as a people, to find that deep connection to God, to find our connection to the Christ, to allow the flow within us, to open it up. We find the living water flowing in our hearts and out of our hearts into the world. Yes, that deep connection allows the flow to happen. I pray that we can find it again. So this week, as almost every week, I want to encourage you to practice deepening your connection. See if you can find within you, it's not out there, it's not around you, it's in here, find that source of living water. Forget the labels. Forget the mantles of who you've said you are, who you proclaim yourself to be. What? No. Be one who practices. Be one who seeks. Be one who explores that inner journey. Find the connection to your source, to your God. And may we all find that living water to nurture us so that we can drink, so we can be sustained, and to free that living water that flows out of us. So our hearts will find the streams of living water for a world that is incredibly thirsty. So thirsty. May we find it soon. Amen.